your show.
Here we go. So for a while now, I've wanted to start doing some more videos on creators and doing creator profiles. And I racked my brain for which creator we could start with. And then it dawned on me what would be obvious. So here we go with our very first creator profile. Okay, so you're going to be pretty familiar with a lot of this.
I have run a Facebook page dedicated to this for many years, and I actually did a bunch of research. In a past life, I had a blog, and I used to talk about this all the time.
Yeah. So we're going to begin as simply as possible.
Way back.
Way back.
Back in time.
We're going to get those wavy. Can we get those wavy?
I'm betting most people don't know the full history of this.
Not really, no. I bet they know some of it, but not all of it. Right?
Absolutely.
Okay, let's get going here. Sometime in 1930, two Cleveland, Ohio high school boys became friends. They bonded over many things that they had in common.
Then they started a YouTube channel, and now it's... Oh, no, sorry. We're not from Cleveland. Sorry. It's not about us. Similar.
Well, these two high school guys, they bonded over their love of science fiction and adventure stories and a relatively new form of entertainment at the time, movies. This is 1930.
And they were both Jewish.
Yeah. So one was Jerome Jerry Siegel. He was a Cleveland native whose parents had fled rampant anti-Semitism in their native Lithuania. He wanted to be a writer. And then there was Joseph Joe Shuster, who had moved to Cleveland from Toronto 6 years earlier. His parents had also fled anti-Semitism in Europe. They had first settled in Toronto and then moved to Cleveland looking for better economic prospects during the Depression.
Were they born in Europe, either one of them, or no?
No, they were both born.
Both born.
Yeah, on this side of the pond.
Okay.
Joe was a self-taught and very talented artist, and Jerry wanted to be a writer. The friendship between these two young men would change popular entertainment forever.
Oh, in so many ways.
Yeah. In case you didn't already know, Joe and Jerry created Superman. It's not much of an exaggeration to say that a lot of you watching this wouldn't be watching this if not for Superman.
I don't think we'd be here.
And we certainly wouldn't be doing this precise kind of show without Superman.
I would agree 100%. We would not be here for without Superman.
Right. So to get into this complicated history of the character, let's try and start as close to the beginning as we can. A character called Superman first appeared in a short prose story written by Siegel with illustrations by Shuster in Siegel's fanzine called Science Fiction in 1932. So the story was called The Reign of the Superman. But this wasn't the big blue Boy Scout that we all know and love. This story was much more in the vein of the pulp stories that were at the height of their popularity then. This Superman wasn't a visitor from another planet, but he was a homeless man pulled off of a bread line, an unfortunately very common sight during the Great Depression, by an evil scientist who did experiments on him and gave him vast telepathic and clairvoyant powers. With these powers, this Superman attempts to take over the world.
Looked like Lex Luthor.
Right, he looked a lot, in the illustrations he looks like Lex Luthor.
He was bald and he looks a lot like Lex Luthor.
And at the end of the story, the world is basically saved because these powers just wear off on their own, and the man ends up returned to the breadline.
Being a homeless man.
To be a homeless breadline guy back on the streets. Rough ending. Yeah, it's very sad.
But it was self-published.
Self-published in their fanzine. Right.
I wonder what it's worth.
I don't know. I wonder if you can possibly get copies of it. I don't know.
You'd have to figure that if it's a fanzine they did, there's not a lot of copies out there.
Can't be a lot of copies.
I've seen
But you know what's funny?
Pictures of it.
Other writers at the time wrote letters to this fanzine.
So it was popular.
So somebody was reading it.
So someone was getting it.
Yeah.
I would love, we'll do some shortcoming soon on how much
Reign of the Superman.
Sorry to interrupt our Siegel and Shuster episode, but just wanted to add that a copy of their science fiction fanzine sold for $47,800 a couple of years back. Now back to the episode.
I've actually done a lot of research on Reign of the Superman, and it's a very interesting story.
Yeah.
The art is, he's not in his prime yet.
No, not yet. He's not there yet.
So, and the writing is, you know, they're young. They're at the time 17 years old writing this, right?
32. So they were born in 1914.
Yeah. So they're like 16.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were very young then. And look, think about that. Brian's been trying to get us to do a fanzine for like the last 2 years.
Yeah, it just doesn't...
I keep saying no.
No. Yeah, can't get it done.
No.
So, to the disappointment of Siegel and Shuster, the Reign of the Superman didn't get the attention they really wanted. So they turned their sights on a new target, which was the newspaper comic strips.
Where money was.
Right.
There was more money in comic strips than
Absolutely.
comic books at that time.
Yeah. In the earlier part of the 20th century, newspaper strips were an enormously popular form of mass entertainment. By some estimates, the top strips were read by 10 million people on a daily basis. This was an absolute goldmine for writers and artists if they could score a deal with one of the big syndicates that distributed the strips to the nation's papers. Young men like Siegel and Shuster would have been really familiar with the tales of wealth bestowed on creators like Lee Falk or Dick Calkins. And to these two first-generation Americans who couldn't afford college, success in the strips must have looked like a shining city on a hill.
So all you really needed was you needed a character that
Could catch on
across the country, and you would be picked up in syndication in all these different newspapers.
Right.
And like you said, millions of people
10
could be...
million
Well, think
a
about
day.
that time. So take it as the time that it was. There's no TV at that time.
Nope.
So the majority of people are getting their entertainment from the newspapers.
Oh, absolutely. From Flash Gordon, from The Spirit.
Tarzan.
Not Spirit, from The Phantom.
Tarzan.
Buck Rogers,
Yep.
which started in 25, I think.
So there you go.
Gasoline Alley.
There's you're going to movies
Yep.
on the weekend usually.
Yeah.
During the week, you're listening to the radio.
Right.
The only thing you have with pictures is the comic strips in the
Comic
newspaper,
strips.
and they were hugely popular at that time.
Tremendous. Absolutely. It's unimaginable to us now how big they probably were.
Unimaginable. And
Yeah.
comic books weren't even like a blip yet.
Yeah, no, we're going to get to that.
There
Yeah.
was some, but they were not doing the numbers
Right.
and people were buying newspapers for the comic strips
Right.
as a
yes.
form of entertainment.
Yeah,
So
sure.
Listen, we went way back with this one, way before we were around.
Yeah. Siegel was still attached to the name Superman, so he kept it and reworked the character into a hero because, in his words, heroic characters sold better. He added all the elements of the heroic characters he admired, Samson and Hercules and Errol Flynn and Douglas Fairbanks, mixed in elements of he and Shuster's real life. This new Superman was an immigrant, an alien from a destroyed planet he can never return to, just like their parents. Superman would fight crime, possibly inspired by the untimely death of Siegel's father, who died of a heart attack during a holdup in his tailor shop in 1932. And Superman would act with a moral compass born out of the struggling working class in the Great Depression. Jerry and Joe believed Superman was a surefire success, but at first almost no one else did. For the next 6 years, while the duo found work as freelancers for a few early comic book companies, which was a step below the newspaper strips, back then, early comics were considered like a farm team for the newspapers. Syndicate after syndicate rejected Superman as silly, amateur, and ridiculous. Can you imagine how they feel?
Imagine.
At one point, Siegel became so desperate that he sought out older, more accomplished artists in the hopes it might get a sale, but it didn't work out, and eventually he and Shuster reconciled, and Shuster continued revising the visual look of the character.
Think about the direction of history right there. So as they're trying to sell Superman to various newspaper publications,
Right.
so at that point it's cut into strips, it's cut into newspapers,
Yeah.
and it looks like this.
Yeah.
And no one likes it. Imagine at that point that any one of them says, you know what, let's give these two kids a try. They put it in a newspaper. We may never have Superman in the comic books.
No, he might have just been a
It
comic
might
book
have just
character.
been a comic strip character.
Like Phantom.
That dies when that dies.
Yeah.
Because, like you said, Buck Rogers, they were huge. They're not big in comics. None of those characters.
No, they
Flash
never.
Gordon.
They never translated
No.
from the strips to comic
Which-
books properly.
Again, makes for another good story. They should have.
Sure, I mean the Phantom should have worked.
100. The Phantom should have worked. Tarzan should have been a popular thing. Flash Gordon should be.
Huge.
Flash Gordon should be more popular than he ever was. I don't
Right.
understand
I
how.
don't know why it's not.
Whoever mismanaged that character, it's absolutely terrible.
Yeah,
But
it is.
Superman, the change in history right there could have changed the direction of comic books forever.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Shuster, taking a cue from other popular heroes, designed a distinct costume for the character. A blue gymnast suit with a gold emblem emblazoned with an S in its center, and added a bright red cape for flash and motion. Shuster's Superman is earthbound but dynamic and athletic in motion. not like the godlike figure he would become later. This powerful appearance contrasted with his appearance as alter ego Clark Kent, who's drab and stilted. One of the companies Siegel and Shuster worked for was National Publications, which is the company that eventually would evolve into DC Comics. In 1935, the two contributed a Henry Duval detective story and created their character Dr. Occult in National's New Fun number 6. But they still held out hopes for Superman and success in the strips. National Publications was started by a really colorful guy named Malcolm Wheeler Smith. And I could probably write an entire episode just about him.
Absolutely could.
And Siegel and Shuster had pitched Superman to him, but Wheeler Smith turned it down, believing no one would like the character. So in 1937, Wheeler and Smith's economic situation was souring quickly. He was going broke because of some bad business decisions and bad deals he had made. And he was forced to partner with publishers Harry Donenfeld and Jack Leibowitz to produce an anthology series he hoped would help the company. It was called Action Comics.
So at this time, there's really no superheroes.
Not really, no.
So there's really no one with superpowers.
Not what we recognize as superheroes.
Right. There's no superpowered characters.
Well, there's Popeye, but that's what I'm saying. It's like that would be the equivalent.
Like,
yeah.
Flash Gordon doesn't have powers. Buck Rogers doesn't have powers. Tarzan doesn't have powers.
No.
They're all heroes.
The Shadow was in pulps and he kind of had powers,
but there's no
not
superheroes.
Really. Yeah.
So Superman, I could see why they turned him down, because the fact that it's a superhero with these powers at the time, we recognize it now, and we see, we have hundreds and hundreds of heroes that we recognize. Back then, this is a brand new idea.
It's an idea that nobody really
no
gets.
one thinks will.
Right.
And we're 30 years away from the science fiction boom in comic books and in television. Yep. We're really at a point where the only science fiction thing you really think about then you have
the pulp magazines.
Pulp magazines, you have War of the Worlds really starts breaking.
Well, that's when Americans started reading War of the Worlds.
Right.
Yeah.
So you have in film, it's science fiction starts to leak into it
into
at
like
this point.
The 50s. Yeah. That's really when sci-fi gets big.
We're still a ways away. So
yeah. Before Action Comics went into production, Wheeler Smith was forced to declare bankruptcy. And in January of 1938, Donenfeld and Leibowitz seized the company. You had National Publications and kind of ushered Wheeler Smith to the sidelines of history. Seeing a new opportunity, Siegel and Shuster pitched Superman to the new bosses, and both Donenfeld and Leibowitz agreed it had potential. Siegel and Shuster were offered $130 for the first 13-page Superman story and the rights to the character.
That's 1937, right?
Yeah.
That's a lot of money in 1937.
Well, January of 38. So yeah.
It's a lot of money.
Yeah, it is actually. It's the equivalent of about $3,000 now. Okay. This kind of contract was pretty typical for the comic book industry at the time. Creators signed away ownership of their characters all the time. Actually, and in many cases, they still do. When they work for a company, they do not own the character. Tired of rejection and hoping this would lead to work in the newspaper strips or at least steady work with National, Jerry and Joe agreed, and Superman became the property of National Publications.
So even at this time, they're still looking to get into the newspaper.
They still want to get newspaper.
They don't want to be doing comic books. No. They want to be. At that point in time, what were the characters that National was using?
They had Dr. Occult.
There was a lot.
There was Henry Duval, the detective. There would have been Slam Bradley, who was also created by Siegel and Shuster.
Yeah, before Superman, Slam Bradley.
Yeah.
So no. They didn't
have a lot of characters.
No, they didn't. So I could see how they were going bankrupt. They didn't have really anything catchy.
Much. No.
Okay.
Right. So Superman appeared on both the cover and the feature, the first story,
which was bold,
in Action Comics #1 on April 18th, 1938, and as cover dated June 1938.
You know why they do that?
No, I never knew why there was such a month difference. Why was that?
Here's why. So if I have a comic book that comes out in April, right? When May comes around, I don't want to buy that comic anymore. That's a month old. What am I going to use that?
Sure.
So if you predate it 2 months, you sell a comic for 3 months instead of 1 month.
Oh.
So you get a comic that's sold in April. It says June on it. If I go there in June, I think it's a new title. So it was kind of like a way to manipulate and get more time selling.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Still to this day, they do that.
They do that, yeah.
I mean, they don't really need to now, but it's not on newsstand. But it's the remnants of this old time where
they've already done it.
Had extra time to sell something.
Right. No one could have guessed it then, but the comic book world and American culture was about to change. A golden age had begun. The Superman of Action Comics #1 isn't quite the Superman most people are familiar with. Yeah, he was dressed in the iconic blue and red costume that Shuster had designed, although the emblem on his chest is different than it is now. He used the secret identity of Clark Kent. He came from the lost planet Krypton and fought injustice, but that's pretty much where the similarities end.
Pretty much.
Sure, this Superman had superhuman strength, but he wasn't completely invulnerable. It's pointed out on the first page, actually, that his skin could be pierced by an artillery shell. He doesn't fly. He travels about by tremendous leaps and jumps, which looks good in a comic book, but in animation and TV, it didn't look good.
The question I have is, at this point, there's not a single character that flies.
No.
So that's probably why he's not flying.
He doesn't have freeze breath or X-ray vision or heat vision. Instead of being raised by the Kents, he was raised in an orphanage. I know.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. This Superman, they have it just in one panel.
Really?
Where he's picking a chair up in an orphanage. And
Oh, yeah, I know the
one.
panel.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's like a baby with a diaper on.
Yeah, yeah. The Kents aren't mentioned.
Imagine Superman's poops at that time.
Ooh,
Ooh,
super.
super poops.
Yeah, the poops of steel.
Okay.
Now, the fact that he's raised in an orphanage is kind of important for his character early on, because this Superman rose from the bottom of Depression society, and the crimes he fights during his premiere story reflect an obvious sympathy with the oppressed class. Instead of mad scientists and megalomaniacal aliens, Superman fought unjust prosecutions, abusive husbands, and sleazy arms dealers.
Abusive husband.
Yeah, remember he attacks that?
Yeah, I know.
He was a champion of the working class, using his abilities to defend the forgotten and invisible members of society against the rich and powerful. This defense of common workers against the predations of greedy capitalists would be a hallmark of Siegel and Shuster's early Superman stories. According to all available accounts, Action Comics #1 was a smash hit. Comichron.com, the official website that tracks comic book sales for the industry, doesn't have any records earlier than 1960 for DC Comics. And anyway, comic book companies back then were notorious for hiding their profits
From the mob.
from the mob and the IRS. But anecdotal records support the idea that Action Comics was a sensation. One of the biggest facts that support that Superman was responsible for this was that he was on the cover, which is the first thing a prospective customer would see.
Funny that it goes from no one wanting to publish it to being on the cover.
On the cover, right.
Of a new flagship comic.
Plus, newsstand owners, where most comics were sold at the time, reported kids asking for the magazine with Superman in it rather than for the comic's name. Finally, by Action Comics #6, there was a text on the cover stating Superman in this issue and every issue.
Because they didn't put him on every cover.
No, he was gone for a few issues, and then suddenly he was there. And
Which is why they were going out of business.
Right, and then there was this tag, Superman in this issue and every issue. A decent argument could be made that Superman is really the world's first superhero. We've talked about
absolutely.
this, right?
We've talked about that.
Sure, there were costume adventurers before him, and some even had some superpowers. But Superman was the first character easily recognized by anyone as what we think of as a superhero. He had a costume. He had a secret identity. He had a strange past. He was an orphan. These are all these things.
He has a story.
Yeah, these things come together.
Superhero.
Right. He's kind of half mythological, half modern. Right. So if there were other costume superheroes before Superman, how come he was such a sensation and the others were just popular? My answer to that is a combination of historical context and characterization. During the Great Depression, large swaths of the American people suffered terrible financial hardships, the likes of which had not been seen in some time and haven't, thankfully, been seen since. Scores of people were out of work, hungry and desperate, and feeling cheated by the rich and those in power. How could people in that era, whether children or adults, not love a character who wielded power in the way Superman did? He didn't do it for the love of personal gain or money or any of that stuff. He didn't fight to preserve an oppressive status quo, which had led to such pervasive want and uncertainty. The early Superman went after the greedy bullies and corrupt powers that be that the common people of the Depression would have loved to have attacked.
Was Lois Lane introduced?
Yes, she's in the first story.
I thought so.
Yeah, and he's in love with her, but she doesn't like him because he's Clark Kent, he's wishy-washy. Yeah. This hero was punching all the right people. Crooked industrialists, unethical mining bosses, vicious bullies. In one early story, Superman even threw a slumlord over the horizon. What struggling person, and there were a lot of them, wouldn't have loved to do the same?
I think that's everyone at that time.
Yeah, absolutely.
They want to get the greedy person who's making them poor.
Yeah, sure. And just throw him
Just
over the horizon. Throw him away.
I guess Superman killed at that point.
Oh, yeah, he did.
Uh-oh.
We also can't discount the bright and unique look Shuster gave the character for contributing to this popularity. Amid the drab grays and browns of the depressed 1938, this champion of the people was a blue and red dynamo leaping over dirty streets. He was a shining symbol of a future where things could be better. And one day soon, we might all be the same. Remember, he was called the Man of Tomorrow originally, implying that we might all one day turn into Supermen.
So can we lead that Superman helped this country get out of the Depression and become more...
Well, I don't know about helped get out of it, but definitely helped people relieve the terror and stress of it, probably.
And we'll see later on, he does it again.
Right. Despite being creators of this sudden phenomenon, Siegel and Shuster remained employees of national publications, working for $20 per page for their writing and art. To be fair to National, this was twice the industry standard at the time, but it was a tiny drop in a very big bucket of what National was raking in on the character.
Should have had Superman punch the National people.
Right.
They were the criminal at that point.
Attack Jack Leibowitz.
Yeah.
In 1939, Jack Leibowitz formed a small LLC-style company based solely on Superman in preparation of licensing the character to radio, movies, and merchandise. This is when Superman began his life as an intellectual property.
Think of how quick that happens, though.
Very fast.
He comes out in 1938. By 1931, they're looking to put him in
radio, movies, merchandise.
Within less than a year.
Less than a year.
They make him a marketing juggernaut.
Yeah, because it wasn't until issue 6 that they really put all money behind him.
Yeah. It's amazing in this story how quickly he becomes a phenomenon. So if you can argue the fact that Siegel and Shuster were mistreated in the development of Superman and how they property. But it's not like it goes on for like 10 or 15 years and all of a sudden Superman blows up. Superman blew up right away.
Immediately.
And they continue to be mistreated even though they had the biggest property that, I mean, in all honesty, that pop culture had seen at that point.
Yeah.
It's really the biggest property.
Yeah. And as we'll see
within a year.
In part 2.
There's a part 2?
This is only part 1.
This is only part 1.
As we'll see in part 2.
Subscribe for part 2.
The fortunes of Siegel and Shuster actually get much worse.
Yes.
But we'll get to that soon.
Okay.
The success of Superman didn't just enrich national publications and Donenfeld and Leibowitz, but also raised the stature of comic books in general. Previously viewed as the ugly little stepbrother of the newspaper strips, comic books were starting to be seen as a new avenue to riches by publishers, writers, and artists. It's difficult to determine with any certainty how many comic book companies sprang up in the wake of Superman's success, but conservative estimates put the number somewhere around 20 just between 1938 and 1939.
And that's just companies. That's not comics.
That's just
companies.
Right, yeah. Each of these companies created new heroes, and most of them bore a pretty strong resemblance to Siegel and Shuster's Kryptonian.
Shazam!
Yeah. Many of these companies failed due to mismanagement or just plain old incompetence, but many succeeded too. And the comic book industry as we know it was born.
Absolutely.
It was around this time that Jerry and Joe realized they'd made a terrible, terrible mistake.
Yeah, but they didn't have options. There was no options for them.
I know. But
they had to sell at this point.
Yeah.
See, I think the whole comic book industry should have contributed to Siegel and Shuster's money.
Right.
Not just DC.
National.
DC. They took everyone up another level.
Yep, they did.
Then another level.
They basically started the entire industry.
100%. An industry that still runs today.
Right. So stay tuned for part 2 of this history of Siegel, Shuster, and Superman that I'm calling Whatever Happened to the Men of Tomorrow.
And make sure you subscribe, like us. Also, if you would like to become a member, you can become a member on YouTube. We have a membership program now where you will receive a whole bunch of extra stuff, emojis, badges, access to
fun things,
content that no one else will see.
Right.
You could even help us write the content. If there's something you want to see, become a member.
Yeah.
If that's too much, you give us a thanks right now. Hit those 3 little dots and you can give us a thanks. You get to pick how much you can give us. That helps us keep making these quality videos. We appreciate you. We love the guys that are subscribed to us. We love the comments. We love going back and forth with everybody.
Yep.
Thanks for watching. Love what you collect.
Collect what you love.
We'll see you next time on another Superman video.